All right, welcome to another deep dive, everybody. So you know how this works, right? You send us something you're curious about, some books, some articles, something interesting, and we try to break down the most important ideas. Well, this time around, someone sent in something called a heads up for your startup. It's a PDF, looks like, by Prasad S.N. And we're going to try to unpack all the golden nuggets, all the wisdom in here for those of you out there who are either thinking about starting a business or maybe you've just started one recently.
Yeah, and just to give a little context on the author, Prasad's not some armchair theorist. He's actually got a ton of real-world experience.
Mhm.
He founded his own company, Gruen Solutions LLP, and they're all about like sustainability and making a difference,
I was just reading about that.
Yeah. And before that, he was working at big companies like Timken and Bosch, even spent some time in Germany doing some cultural programs over there. So pretty diverse background.
Sounds like it, yeah.
He's got a degree in mechanical engineering, plus all these management certifications from IM Bangalore. Definitely seems like someone who knows what he's talking about, both from the technical side and the business side.
So what's our mission today? What are we hoping to get out of this deep dive?
Basically, we're going to try to distill like the core message of this book, especially for you guys out there who are, maybe just starting your entrepreneurial journey, or maybe you're just thinking about it. We want to give you a good sense of what you're in for, right?
Yeah.
The good, the bad, and everything in between. And the cool thing is, Prasad's aim here isn't to scare you off. It's more like he wants to prepare you mentally.
Mm.
He actually uses this cool analogy of a roller coaster to describe the whole entrepreneurial experience.
Yeah, there are going to be highs and lows, right?
Exactly. You got to be ready for those stomach-dropping moments, but also for those exhilarating climbs to the top.
All right, so let's get into it. Chapter 1. This one's called A Heads Up.
Love the title. Gets right to the point.
And it starts with a really fundamental question. Are entrepreneurs made or born? Like, is it nature or nurture?
It's like the classic debate, right?
Mm.
Some people think you got to be born with that entrepreneurial spirit. Others think it's something you can develop.
So where does Prasad land on this?
Pretty firmly on the made side. He's like, straight up, entrepreneurs make themselves. And he talks about how it all comes down to putting in the hard work, having that focus, that drive. It's not some magical thing you either have or you don't.
It's about taking action and hustling, right?
Exactly. And I think that ties in nicely with how Google defines an entrepreneur, which he also brings up in the book.
Yeah.
It's someone who sees a need in the market and then takes on the risk and, really importantly, the responsibility of starting and managing a business to fill that need.
So not just seeing a problem, but actually doing something about it.
Yeah, and earning it, taking on that responsibility. Now, for context, this book dives into the startup scene in India specifically, and the growth there has been pretty mind-blowing.
I was looking at these numbers. It's kind of crazy.
Tell me about it. In 2016, there were only like 452 recognized startups in India. Fast forward to 2022, and just in that 1 year, over 23,000 new startups were recognized. And the total number now, over 80,000 startups in India.
That's a lot of competition.
It is, but also like a huge amount of opportunity.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole unicorn thing, which Prasad touches on.
Oh, yeah, the unicorns. Startups valued at over $1 billion. That sounds pretty glamorous, doesn't it?
Stephanie, it's like the dream, right?
Yeah.
And as of February 2023, India had 115 of these unicorns with a combined valuation of, get this, over $350 billion. But Prasad makes this really important point about valuations.
Which is?
Just because a startup is valued that high doesn't mean it's actually making a profit yet. It's more about potential and future growth. So it's important to keep that in mind when you see these flashy headlines about unicorns.
Right, don't get too caught up in the hype.
Exactly. Now, the book also addresses something that doesn't get as much attention, which is the failure rate of startups. And this is where things get a little bit, well, sobering.
Yeah, over 90% of startups in India don't make it past their first 5 years. That's a pretty daunting statistic.
It is. But here's where Prasad offers a really interesting perspective. He says, startups fail, but entrepreneurs always win.
I like that. How does he explain that?
Well, his point is that even if a startup doesn't succeed, the entrepreneur still gains a ton of valuable experience. They build connections, they learn from their mistakes. It's all part of the process.
So it's not really failure, it's more like a learning experience.
Yeah, exactly. A really expensive and possibly painful learning experience, but still valuable in the long run.
So even though there's all this potential in entrepreneurship, it's definitely not for the faint of heart.
No, it's
Yeah.
tough. You're going to face financial struggles, probably intense competition, and a whole lot of self-doubt. It's a real roller coaster, like we talked about.
Which brings us to chapter 2, enticing. Why enticing?
Well, Prasad talks about how all those success stories we hear, the ones about the unicorns and the overnight sensations, plus all those reality shows about startups and stuff, they can make entrepreneurship seem, well, really enticing.
Glamorous even, right?
Yeah, like it's all about funding rounds and parties and being on magazine covers. But Prasad's quick to point out that that's only a tiny part of the picture.
There's a lot more to it, isn't there?
So much more. He talks about all the hidden struggles, all the hard work that goes on behind the scenes. And he emphasizes how, especially in the beginning, entrepreneurs have to wear multiple hats. He even jokes about being the CEO of his company, but also the office manager, the janitor, you name it.
Makes sense. You got to do what you got to do when you're starting out.
Exactly. You're not just the visionary. You're also the one getting your hands dirty, making things happen. And the book really digs into why people are drawn to entrepreneurship in the first place. And the top answer, consistently, across surveys, is to be your own boss.
Freedom and control.
Exactly. That idea of being your own boss, calling the shots, controlling your own destiny, that's incredibly appealing to a lot of people.
But being your own boss isn't all sunshine and roses, is it?
No, and that's where the book gets really insightful. It talks about the importance of self-awareness for entrepreneurs, and it highlights two key aspects of that.
Let's hear them.
The first one is motivation. When you're your own boss, you don't have someone breathing down your neck, setting deadlines, giving you that external push. You got to be self-motivated, driven from within.
You're accountable to yourself.
Exactly. And Prasad stresses how important it is to celebrate small wins, those little victories along the way that keep you going. He even uses this cool example. He says, imagine if you improve just 1% every day for a year, 1.01 to the power of 365. That adds up to almost 38. So those small, consistent improvements make a huge difference in the long run.
Compounding, baby.
Yes. He also talks about the importance of having a support system, other entrepreneurs, mentors, people who understand the journey and can cheer you on.
Having that community is so important.
It really is. And then the second key aspect of self-awareness, which is kind of paradoxical, is self-discipline.
Oh, yeah, that one.
It's tricky.
Because you've got all this freedom, right? You're your own boss. But that means you need even more self-discipline to manage your time, set goals, stick to a schedule. Otherwise, things can easily fall apart.
It's like freedom without discipline is just chaos.
Pretty much. Prasad puts it really well. He says, a lack of self-discipline is just you getting in your own way. And to really illustrate this, he uses a 2x2 matrix based on enticement and self-discipline.
Oh, I remember this one. It's a good one. Break it down for us.
Okay, so in one quadrant, you've got the relaxed folks. These are people who aren't that enticed by entrepreneurship and also don't have a ton of self-discipline. So probably not your typical startup founder.
Probably not, no.
Then there's the dreamers. They're super enthusiastic, full of ideas, but maybe lack that consistent self-discipline to make things happen.
All inspiration, not enough perspiration. Exactly. And then the opposite is the skeptics. They've got the discipline, but they're not really that enticed by the whole entrepreneurship thing, always finding reasons to hold back.
Risk averse, maybe?
Could be. And then finally, you've got the driven. That's like the sweet spot, high on both enticement and self-discipline. Those are the folks who are most likely to succeed.
They've got the fire and the focus.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So it's a good way to think about where you fall in that spectrum.
definitely. It's a good reality check before you jump in.
Yeah.
Okay, chapter 3. This one's called Neglect.
Ooh, this is an interesting one.
Yeah, it is. This chapter really dives into that feeling of, like you're being overlooked. Maybe you're not getting the support you need. You might even feel isolated, especially when you're first starting out.
Yeah, it can be lonely, can't it?
Totally. And Prasad shares some of his own experiences, how his relationships changed when he transitioned from the corporate world to being an entrepreneur. Like some people just didn't get it.
Didn't understand the journey.
Yeah. And he makes this really important distinction between rejection and neglect.
So what's the difference?
Rejection is when you pitch your idea, you put it out there, and someone says no to your face. They've heard you, they considered it, and they decided it's not for them.
Makes sense.
But neglect is when you don't even get that chance. You're just ignored. Like your emails go unanswered, people don't return your calls. It's like you're invisible.
Ouch. That's got to sting.
It does. He talks about how Google's founders were initially rejected by Excite, which was a big deal at the time, but at least they got a meeting, right?
They got their foot in the door.
Exactly. But he also shares stories of just being completely neglected by people he thought were in his corner. And he says that sometimes that silence, that feeling of being ignored, can be even worse than a direct no.
Interesting. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think with a no, at least you know where you stand. You can adjust your approach, you can move on. But with neglect, it's like this uncertainty. You're left wondering what you did wrong, if you're even on the right track.
It's like being in limbo. So how do you deal with that?
Well, Prasad's big on persistence. He's like, you got to be resilient, you got to keep going, even when it feels like no one's paying attention. He says to view each no as a step closer to a yes.
Keep knocking on doors.
Exactly. And he also talks about the importance of being adaptable, trying different approaches. Like if your initial pitch isn't working, maybe you need to tweak it, maybe you need to target a different audience.
Don't be afraid to experiment.
Right. And he gives some really practical advice for dealing with that feeling of neglect. First, join a community.
Find your tribe.
Yeah, whether it's online forums, local meetups, incubators, accelerators. He specifically mentions the Startup Ignition team, which sounds like a cool resource.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah. And then he talks about finding a mentor, someone who's been there, done that, who can guide you and support you. He recommends Startup India as a place to look for mentors.
Great resource. And what was the third piece of advice?
Celebrate small wins. This goes back to the whole self-motivation thing, you know?
Keeps you going.
Exactly. It's like, even if you're not getting external validation, you got to find ways to recognize your own progress and celebrate those little victories, because that builds your confidence and keeps you moving forward.
It's like giving yourself a pat on the back.
Exactly. Now, here's the interesting thing about this chapter. It's not just about being neglected by others. It's also about what entrepreneurs themselves might neglect.
Oh, like blind spots?
Yeah, exactly. Like you're so focused on building your business, getting it off the ground, that you might neglect some really important things. And he highlights three main areas.
Let's hear them.
First, financial management. Like making sure you're tracking your expenses, you have a plan, you're not just spending money willy-nilly.
The unglamorous but essential stuff.
Totally. Then there's self-care and well-being. This is a big one. It's so easy to get caught up in the hustle and grind that you forget to take care of yourself.
You burn the candle at both ends.
Exactly. And then the third area is strategic planning and vision. Like making sure you're not just reacting to things, you're actually thinking about the long term, where you want to go, how you're going to get there.
Having that roadmap. All right, on to chapter 4. This one's called Tiring.
And I think we can all relate to that one, right?
Oh yeah, being an entrepreneur is exhausting.
Totally. And Prasad actually uses this great analogy to describe the entrepreneurial journey. He compares it to running a marathon.
42 kilometers.
Yep, all of it. And he says, just like you can't sprint the entire marathon and expect to finish, you can't go full speed ahead in your business without taking breaks, without recharging.
Pace yourself.
Exactly. And he really emphasizes that quitting should be the very last option.
Never give up.
Right? But he also acknowledges that there are times when you need to step back, you need to rest, and he gives some indicators that you might be approaching burnout.
What are the warning signs?
He lists things like feeling constantly burnt out, obviously. Then there's declining productivity, like you're just not getting as much done as you used to. Lack of creativity, your ideas are drying up.
Those are all pretty clear signs.
Yeah. And then there are the physical signs, too. Health issues popping up, high stress levels, neglecting your personal life, feeling constantly demotivated. Those are all red flags.
So why do you think entrepreneurs get so tired?
Well, he talks about a few reasons. One is the lack of work-life balance. Like when your business is your baby, it's really hard to switch off, right?
You're always on.
Yeah. And he says it's important to set boundaries, prioritize your personal life, even though it's tough.
Easier said than done sometimes.
Totally. Then there's the constant pressure to succeed. He talks about how social media can actually make this worse because you're constantly seeing these curated versions of success.
The highlight reel.
Yeah. And it creates this pressure to always be doing more, to always be achieving. And then, of course, there's financial stress, like especially in the beginning, you might be bootstrapping, you might be living on ramen noodles.
Hustle is real.
It is. So yeah, all those things contribute to entrepreneurial fatigue. But the good news is he offers some really practical tips for dealing with it.
Hit us with those tips.
First and foremost, prioritize self-care. He even mentions an HBR article about how sleep is crucial for performance.
Sleep is so underrated.
It really is. Then there's delegating tasks. Like if you can afford to hire someone to help you, even for a few hours a week, it can make a huge difference.
Take some things off your plate.
Exactly. And if you have a small team, he talks about adjusting timelines, not overworking yourselves. Setting clear boundaries between work and personal life, especially if you're working from home, is super important.
Don't let work bleed into every aspect of your life.
Right. And then having consistent work timings, like set some hours for yourself and stick to them as much as possible. It creates some structure and helps you avoid burnout.
And it helps the people around you too, probably.
Yeah. Definitely. He also talks about finding your community, connecting with other entrepreneurs who get it, and finally taking breaks, like actually scheduling time off, even if it's just for a few days. He uses this analogy of Shah Rukh Khan, the Bollywood star,
I know Shah Rukh Khan.
Right. So he says how Shah Rukh Khan actually takes strategic breaks from acting to recharge and come back even stronger. And the same principle applies to entrepreneurship. Like sometimes stepping back is the best way to move forward.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, next chapter, chapter 5. This one's all about risks.
And it starts with a quote from Einstein, which I love. He says, "Anyone who has never made a mistake has never tried anything new."
Love that quote.
Right. It's basically saying that taking risks is an inherent part of innovation, of trying new things. And Prasad even asks this question, what is not risky? Like in today's world, everything involves some level of risk.
True that.
So he goes on to outline a bunch of different types of risks that entrepreneurs should be aware of. And the first one, kind of broadly, is just uncertainty, like the fact that you don't know what's going to happen, you don't have a crystal ball.
You're stepping into the unknown.
Exactly. Then there's financial risk, like you're putting your own money or maybe investors' money into this venture and there's no guarantee of a return.
You could lose it all.
Yeah. And he actually breaks this down with a formula, which is kind of cool. He says R, which stands for risk, equals C minus S divided by P. C is your initial commitment or investment. S is your projected sales, and P is the time period you're looking at. So it's basically a way to calculate your potential financial exposure.
Quantifying the risk.
Yeah. Then there's market risk, which is the risk that there's actually no demand for your product or service. Like you built it, but no one wants to buy it.
That's a tough one.
It is. Then there's operational risk. This is about managing the day-to-day aspects of the business, making sure things run smoothly, dealing with unexpected events like supply chain disruptions or, whatever craziness might happen.
Keeping the lights on.
Exactly. Then there's regulatory risk, like making sure you're complying with all the laws and regulations that apply to your business. He specifically mentions IP, which is for healthcare startups, and data protection laws for fintech companies.
Staying on the right side of the law.
Definitely. Then there's reputation risk. This is a big one in the age of social media. Like one bad review can go viral and really damage your brand.
Word spreads fast these days.
It does. And he stresses how important it is for founders to be actively involved in managing their company's reputation, especially in the early stages, like engaging with customers directly, building that trust. And finally, there's health risk, which is something we talked about before.
Burnout, stress, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, the long hours, the pressure, it can take a toll on your physical and mental health. So he emphasizes the importance of prioritizing your well-being.
Take care of yourself.
Exactly. Now, it's important to note that this chapter isn't meant to scare you off. It's more about being aware of the risks so you can prepare for them, you can mitigate them as much as possible.
Knowledge is power.
Exactly. Okay, chapter 6. This one's titled Ego.
Ooh, this is a juicy one.
It is. And it starts by acknowledging that self-confidence is important for entrepreneurs. Like, you got to believe in yourself, you got to believe in your idea. But there's a fine line between confidence and ego.
And when you cross that line,
things can go south pretty quickly. He gives some examples of common ego-driven thoughts that entrepreneurs might have, like, I know better than everyone else, or my idea is so revolutionary, it's beyond criticism.
the I'm always right trap. Yeah.
And he lists some indicators that your ego might be getting in the way. Like if you're resistant to feedback, that's a big one.
Not wanting to hear anything negative.
Right. Or if you take all the credit for successes, but deflect blame for failures.
Not a team player.
Definitely not. He also talks about having a constant need for external validation, disregarding other people's opinions, having difficulty admitting mistakes, and lacking empathy.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It kind of is. Like an unchecked ego can really damage your relationships with your team, with investors, with customers.
It isolates you.
Yeah, and it makes you less likely to learn and adapt.
So, what's the antidote to this? He talks about the power of humility.
Humility, that's a good one. Yeah, it's about being grounded, being open to learning from others. And he gives some really practical advice for cultivating humility. First, Build genuine self-confidence.
Not the fake kind.
Right, not the arrogant kind. It's about knowing your strengths, but also being aware of your weaknesses. Then be self-aware. Like, honestly, assess your own behavior, your own impact on others.
Take a step back and look in the mirror.
Exactly. And practice humility in your interactions with others. Seek feedback. Be open to different perspectives.
Be a good listener.
Yeah. And foster a growth mindset, you know?
Always be learning.
Right. View challenges as opportunities to grow rather than as threats. And practice gratitude. Like,
Right.
appreciate the contributions of others. Recognize that you didn't get here alone.
No one's an island.
Totally. And finally, stay adaptable and open-minded. Don't get stuck in your ways.
Be willing to change course.
Exactly. Okay, moving on to chapter 7, perseverance.
This is another big one, isn't it?
It is. Like, perseverance is essential for entrepreneurs. Prasad actually quotes Google's definition here, which is persistence in doing something despite difficulty or delay in achieving success.
Keep going even when it's tough.
Yep. And he describes it as stubbornness with a purpose. Like, you're not just being stubborn for the sake of it. You're stubborn because you believe in what you're doing. You're committed to your goal.
You're in it for the long haul.
Exactly. And he ties perseverance to having a strong sense of purpose. Like, the why behind your business, that's what keeps you going when things get tough.
The fuel that keeps you moving.
Right. And he uses another 2x2 matrix here. This one categorizes people based on their level of perseverance and how they handle results.
Let's break it down.
Okay, so in one quadrant, you've got the impulsive folks. These are the ones who jump from one idea to the next. They don't really stick with anything long enough to see results.
They lack follow-through.
Yeah. Then you've got the frustration category. These people give up easily when they don't see immediate results.
They get discouraged quickly.
Exactly. Then there's determination. These people are resilient, they keep going, but they also know how to enjoy the rewards of their hard work.
They find that balance.
Yeah. And finally, there's patience. These are the folks who understand that big achievements often take time. They're in it for the long game.
They play the long game.
Yeah.
So how do you develop this whole perseverance thing?
Well, he gives some great advice. First, develop a growth mindset. This is about believing that your abilities can be improved with effort and seeing challenges as opportunities to learn and grow.
Don't be afraid to fail.
Exactly. Failure is just part of the process. Then set realistic goals. He talks about SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Like, if you set unrealistic goals, you're just setting yourself up for disappointment.
Setting yourself up for failure.
Right. And then he says to learn from your failures. Like, don't just brush them under the rug. Actually analyze what went wrong, what you can do better next time. He even suggests keeping a journal of your failures and the lessons you learned.
Document it.
Yeah. Then build a support system, like we talked about before. Having people you can lean on, who can encourage you, is so important. And stay focused on your purpose. Like, keep reminding yourself why you started this in the first place.
Don't lose sight of the big picture.
Exactly. And finally, seek inspiration from others. Like, read stories about successful entrepreneurs, learn from their journeys, see how they overcame challenges.
Get inspired.
Yeah.
Okay, Chapter 8, Rewards.
This is a good one.
Everybody loves rewards, right?
Totally. And Prasad starts by acknowledging that, the initial phase of entrepreneurship can be tough financially.
Not a lot of money coming in.
Right. But he also talks about the potential for long-term financial rewards. Like, you might eventually be able to pay yourself a decent salary. You might get dividends, profits. And if you're really successful, you might even be able to sell your business for a lot of money.
The big exit.
Yeah. But he's also realistic. Like, he says, be prepared for those lean times, have those conversations with your family and make sure everyone's on board. He even gives this example of an employee versus an entrepreneur, comparing their potential income trajectories over a few years.
Yes.
The employee has a steady income, but it doesn't really grow that much. The entrepreneur, on the other hand, might have very little income in the beginning, but then if things take off, it can skyrocket.
High risk, high reward.
Exactly. But he also stresses that the rewards of entrepreneurship go way beyond just money.
There's more to it than just making a buck.
Totally. He talks about the non-financial rewards, like the sense of achievement you get from building something from scratch.
That feeling of accomplishment.
Yeah, and the satisfaction of creating something that solves a real problem that makes a difference in people's lives. And then there's the personal growth aspect, like you become more resourceful, more adaptable, more resilient.
You learn a ton.
You do. And then there's the independence and autonomy, which we talked about before.
Being your own boss.
Yep. And he has this whole section on balancing rewards and vision, like making sure you don't get so caught up in the pursuit of rewards, whether it's money or fame or whatever, that you lose sight of your original vision, your purpose.
Don't let success go to your head.
Exactly. He uses Elon Musk and Tesla as an example, how they've stayed pretty true to their mission even though they've achieved incredible financial success.
Staying grounded. Okay, on to chapter 9, ethics.
This is an important one.
Ethics are always important.
Definitely. And Prasad starts by saying that ethics can be complex, It's not always black and white. But he stresses that for entrepreneurs, operating ethically is absolutely crucial.
It's the foundation of a good business.
It is. And he specifically warns against, trying to make a quick buck by cutting ethical corners. He's like, even when you're facing financial challenges, don't compromise your principles.
Stick to your values.
Exactly. And he outlines a bunch of different areas where entrepreneurs need to be extra careful about ethical practices, like honesty and transparency in all your dealings, treating your employees fairly, protecting intellectual property, maintaining financial integrity, being environmentally responsible, considering your social impact, making sure your partnerships and supply chains are ethical, ensuring data security and privacy, practicing responsible marketing and advertising, and even being ethical in how you promote yourself.
It's a lot to keep in mind.
It is. But he makes the point that being ethical not only benefits your business in the long run, it also helps build a better world.
It's a win-win.
Totally. Okay, next chapter, chapter 10. This one's all about network.
Networking is key, isn't it?
It is. He defines it as building and maintaining relationships for support, guidance, and opportunities.
It's about connections.
Yeah, and he stresses that it's a two-way street. It's not just about taking, it's about giving, too. You got to contribute to your network, offer value, be helpful.
It's a give and take.
Exactly. And he uses another 2x2 matrix here. This one categorizes people based on their approach to giving and taking in networking.
Let's hear it.
Okay, so in one quadrant, you've got the inactive folks. These are the ones who don't really do much networking. They don't reach out. They don't offer help. They don't ask for help.
They're on the sidelines.
Yeah. Then there are the takers. They're always looking for what they can get from others, but they don't really give anything back.